I'm Chloe, I'm 28 years old, a woman, and just last week, my family officially confirmed what I had suspected my entire life, that I was never truly one of them. They did it in the most final way imaginable, by cutting me out of my adoptive fathers will purely because I was adopted. My life has always been defined by quiet footnotes and subtle asterisks. In the family album, my baby pictures start a little later than my brother's. At family gatherings, my origin story was a sanitized, brief anecdote told to new acquaintances, while my brother Ethan's was a rich tapestry woven with generations of inside jokes and inherited traits. I was the addendum, the postscript to a family that felt complete before I arrived. My adoptive parents, Richard and Helen, were good people in the way that people who donate to charity and return their shopping carts are good. They provided a roof over my head, food on the table, and a decent education. They never used cruel words or neglected my basic needs. But there is a vast, cavernous space between not being cruel and being truly loving, and I lived my life in that empty space. They gave me a home, but they never quite made me feel at home. The undeniable center of their universe was Ethan. He was their biological son, born 2 years before they adopted me. He was the sun, and I was a distant planet, occasionally catching a bit of warmth, but never truly pulled into the family's gravitational field. Ethan wasn't just the golden child, he was the only child who seemed to matter. I see it so clearly now, looking back. It wasn't one single event, but a lifetime of 1,000 tiny cuts. I remember my 10th birthday. I had been obsessed with astronomy for months, circling a specific telescope in a catalog, leaving hints everywhere. When the day came, I received a sensible, beige sweater and a book on practical hobbies. Later that year, for Ethan's 12th birthday, the entire living room was transformed into a veritable electronics store. A brand new gaming console, a top-of-the-line sound system, and the biggest, most obnoxious television I had ever seen. When I looked at my father, Richard, his face was beaming with a pride I had never seen directed at me. "Nothing's too good for my boy," he'd said, ruffling Ethan's hair. My sensible sweater suddenly felt itchy and suffocating another time. In high school, I won a statewide history competition. I had studied for months, my little desk lamp burning late into the night. I came home clutching a trophy and a certificate, my heart thumping with a desperate need for their approval. Helen glanced at it, smiled politely, and said, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Now, could you help me set the table? Ethan's soccer team is having their end-of-season banquet here tonight." The banquet, a celebration of their team finishing third to last in the league, was apparently a far more significant event. My trophy was placed on a small end table, where it was soon obscured by a platter of cold cuts. Ethan and his friends ran through the house, shouting and laughing, while I quietly arranged forks and knives, a silent ghost at their feast. Ethan, for his part, learned his role perfectly. He wasn't just the favorite, he was the gatekeeper of our parents' affection. He wielded his biological status like a weapon, sometimes with overt cruelty, sometimes with a casual, dismissive air that was somehow worse. He'd often forget to tell me about family plans, leading to me being the only one to show up to a canceled dinner or miss a relative's visit. When I would get upset, he'd give me that smirking, insincere apology. "Oh, sorry, Chloe. It must have slipped my mind. Guess you're just not on the family group chat." He'd say it with a laugh, as if it were the funniest joke in the world. Helen and Richard would just shake their heads, murmuring, "Oh, Ethan," with a tone of fond exasperation. They never corrected him. They never stood up for me. His casual cruelty was just a part of the family dynamic that I was expected to endure. The worst was the constant, insidious refrain of a blood. Richard was obsessed with lineage and legacy. He ran a moderately successful construction firm, one his grandfather had started. He spoke of it in grand, sweeping terms, as if he were a Roman emperor discussing his dynasty. "It's in our blood, Ethan," he would say, clapping my brother on the back. "The drive, the instinct for building. You've got it. It's your birthright." They would stand over blueprints together, their heads close, speaking a language of which I was not a part. I was a history teacher, a profession Richard dismissed as noble but not profitable. He couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to be part of his legacy. The truth was, I was never invited. I was an outsider, and after a while, I stopped knocking. On the door to SO, when Richard passed away after a sudden illness a few months ago, I felt a strange mix of grief and numbness. I mourned the father I wished he had been, the man who might have seen me as his daughter, not just as a project of his charity. The condolences from family friends were awkward. They'd hug Helen, then Ethan, then turn to me with a hesitant pity, their eyes saying what their mouths wouldn't. This must be so hard for you, the adopted one. Even in his death, my status was the unspoken headline. I didn't know then that the unspoken was about to become the explicit, printed in black and white for all to see. On a week after the funeral, the four of us, myself, Helen, and Ethan, gathered in the stuffy, wood-paneled office of Mr. Davison, Richard's longtime lawyer. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and stale grief. Helen, dressed in impeccable black, sat stiffly in a leather armchair, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. It was a performance of sorrow, and she was a seasoned actress. Ethan sat beside her, looking less like a grieving son and more like a bored prince waiting for his coronation. He kept checking his phone, a look of smug impatience on his face. I sat opposite them, feeling like I was on the wrong side of an invisible line. I had worn a simple black dress, and I suddenly felt underdressed, out of place. I clutched my purse in my lap, my knuckles white. I wasn't expecting much. Perhaps a small, sentimental item, a token gesture to maintain the facade of a happy family. I had already made peace with the fact that the bulk of the estate, the company, the house, the legacy, would go to Ethan. It was the natural order of things in our family. I just wanted this ordeal to be over so I could retreat back to my own small, quiet life. Mr. Davison, a portly man with a kind but weary face, cleared his throat. He looked at me with a flicker of what I now recognize as pity. "Thank you all for coming," he began, shuffling a stack of papers. Richard was very clear in his instructions. "I will now read the last will and testament of Richard J. Sterling." He droned on through the usual legal jargon, bequeathing small items to distant relatives and making donations to his preferred charities. My mind began to wander. I stared at a painting on the wall, a dreary landscape of a windswept coast. It felt appropriate. Then, Mr. Davison paused. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the final pages. "Regarding the primary assets," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "including Sterling and Son Construction, the family home located at 1420 Oakwood Drive, and all remaining financial accounts, Richard has decreed the following." Ethan sat up straighter, a greedy glint in his eyes. This was the moment he had been waiting for his entire life. "I bequeath my entire remaining estate, without exception," Mr. Davison read, his words precise and devastating, "to my son, my only true heir, Ethan Sterling." A sharp silence filled the room. I felt the air leave my lungs. But it was the next sentence, the explanation, that shattered me completely. Mr. Davison took a deep breath before continuing. "A note from Richard has been attached to this clause. It reads, 'To Chloe, whom we took into our home. While we provided for you throughout your life, I must ensure the Sterling legacy, our heritage and our bloodline, is passed down intact. As you are not of our blood, you are not a party to this inheritance.' Not of our blood," the words hung in the air, cold and sharp as shards of glass. It wasn't just about the money. It was the codification of my entire existence in their home. I was a guest, a temporary resident whose term had just expired. The love I had so desperately craved was conditional, and the condition was blood, something I could never have. I felt my face flush with a hot, sickening shame. My eyes darted to Helen. She refused to meet my gaze, instead choosing to inspect a loose thread on her sleeve as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. Her silence was her consent. She had known. She had agreed, and then, I heard it. A low chuckle from across the room. I looked up. Ethan was laughing. It wasn't a loud, boisterous laugh, but a quiet, cruel, and deeply satisfied one. He shook his head, a smirk spreading across his face as he looked directly at me, his eyes full of triumphant malice. "Well, there you have it," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He leaned forward, as if sharing a secret. "You are not one of us anyway." That was it. The secret, ugly truth of our family, spoken aloud. All the years of subtle exclusion, of being made to feel less than, had been leading to this single, brutal moment of confirmation. The polite fiction we had all maintained was finally stripped away, and the reality underneath was rotten. I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was closing in on me. Mr. Davison was looking at me with genuine concern. "Miss Sterling." "Chloe." "I am so sorry," he murmured. But his voice sounded distant, as if coming from the end of a long tunnel. The only thing I could hear was Ethan's laughter echoing in my ears. I didn't say a word. I didn't cry. I simply stood up, my movements stiff and robotic. I turned my back on my mother, who still wouldn't look at me, and on my brother, who was basking in his victory. Without a word, I walked out of the office, out of the building, and out of the life I had always known. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, a sound of absolute finality. The city streets felt alien. The familiar sounds of traffic and chatter were a dull roar in the background of the screaming silence in my head. "Not of our blood. You're not one of us anyway." The phrases played on a loop, a cruel soundtrack to my numb procession through the crowds of strangers. Each face I passed seemed to mock me, to know the secret I had just learned. I was officially, legally, and fundamentally alone. I don't remember the walk back to my small apartment. It was as if my body was on autopilot while my mind was trapped in that suffocating lawyer's office. When I finally found myself standing in front of my own door, fumbling for my keys, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. My apartment, usually my sanctuary, a place filled with books and history, my things, suddenly felt like the last refuge of a castaway. Inside, I leaned against the closed door, my legs finally giving out. I slid down to the floor, my bag thudding beside me. The tears I had refused to shed in front of them came in a hot, silent torrent. They weren't just tears of sadness, but of a profound and hollow emptiness. It was the grief of realizing you had been mourning a family that was never truly yours to begin with. Every memory was now tainted, recontextualized through the lens of that will. The sensible birthday sweaters weren't just thoughtless, they were a deliberate reminder of my practical, non-celebratory place in the family. The forgotten invitations from Ethan weren't just careless bullying, they were policy. I was the outsider, and my exclusion was the point. I thought of Helen, my mother, and her refusal to meet my eyes. Her cowardice was the deepest cut of all. A father's cruelty is a blow, but a mother's silent complicity is a poison that seeps into your soul. I stayed on the floor for what felt like hours, surrounded by the quiet hum of my refrigerator and the ticking of a clock on the wall. Each tick felt like a second of my old life falling away, leaving nothing in its place. I had built my identity around them, even in my rebellion against their favoritism. I was Chloe, the adopted daughter, the one who tried harder, the one who carved out her own path. But a huge part of that identity was defined by what I was not. I was not Ethan. Now, I wasn't even a Sterling. I was just Chloe. The name felt thin, rootless. My job as a history teacher suddenly felt like a bitter irony. I spent my days teaching teenagers about origins, about how the past shapes the present, about the importance of knowing where you come from. But where did I come from? I had a birth certificate with a blank space where a father's name should be and a mother's name I didn't recognize. My adoptive family had been the only history I knew, and it had just been declared a fiction. The next few days passed in a blur of gray. I called in sick to work, unable to face my students, unable to pretend that the world was an orderly place of cause and effect. I didn't answer my phone, which buzzed occasionally with texts from concerned friends. How could I even begin to explain? "Sorry, I've been out of touch, my family just disowned me via legal document. I didn't eat. I barely slept." I would drift off and see Ethan's smirking face, hear his laugh. I'd wake up with my heart pounding, the shame fresh all over again. The hurt was a physical thing, a heavy weight in my chest. It was the feeling of being utterly and completely unwanted. The core fear of every adopted child, the one you spend your life trying to disprove, had been validated in the most brutal way imaginable. They didn't want me. It was that simple. And after 28 years of trying to earn my place at their table, the finality of it was both devastating and, in a strange way, liberating. The fight was over. I had lost by the fifth day, the initial storm of emotion had subsided into a vast, weary calm. I forced myself to get out of bed, to take a shower, to eat a piece of toast that tasted like cardboard. The numbness was a shield. And I was grateful for it. I decided that was it. No more grieving for people who were still alive. No more wasting energy on a family that had cast me aside. It was time to start over, even if I had no idea what that meant. I sat at my small kitchen table with a cup of tea, looking out the window at the brick wall of the opposite building. I needed a plan. I would focus on my students, on the history I loved. I would save up, maybe travel during the summer. I would build a life so full and happy that the name Sterling would become nothing more than a faint echo of a past I had outgrown. It was in the middle of this fragile, newly formed resolve that my phone rang. The screen displayed an unknown number with a downtown area code. My first instinct was to ignore it. It was probably a telemarketer, or worse, someone from my old life, a family friend calling on Helen's behalf to offer some platitude-filled, hollow apology, but something made me answer. Perhaps it was the flicker of a new leaf I was trying to turn over. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. "Am I speaking with Ms. Chloe?" a man's voice asked. It was a rich, formal baritone, calm and professional. "This is she," I confirmed. My guard immediately up. "Who is this?" "My name is Arthur Albright," the man said. "I am an attorney with the firm of Albright, Finch, and Associates. I apologize for the unsolicited call, but I am handling an estate matter of a deeply personal and urgent nature that concerns you directly." My heart sank. "And estate matter?" My mind immediately flew back to Mr. Davison's office. Had they changed their minds? Was this some new, fresh hell? Maybe they had decided to send me a bill for my upbringing. The thought was so absurdly cruel that it actually seemed plausible. "I think you have the wrong person," I said quickly, my voice cold. "I was recently informed in no uncertain terms that I am not party to any family inheritance. So whatever this is, I'm not interested." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I can assure you, Ms. Chloe, that I do not represent the Sterling family," Mr. Albright said, his tone gentle but firm. "My business with you is entirely separate. It pertains to the estate of Eleanor and James Hamilton." The names meant nothing to me. "I don't know anyone by that name," I said, my patience wearing thin. "Look, I'm sorry, but I'm in the middle of something. I have to go." "Please, Ms. Chloe, do not hang up," he said, a new urgency in his voice. "I understand this is confusing. Eleanor Hamilton was your biological mother." The world stopped. I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white for the second time in a week. The brick wall outside my window seemed to blur. My breath hitched in my throat. "Your biological mother." The words I had sometimes dreamed of, sometimes dreaded, spoken so matter-of-factly by a stranger over the phone. "What did you say?" I whispered. "Your mother, Eleanor, and your father, James, have been searching for you for over 20 years, Mr. Albright explained softly. Tragically, we found you too late. They were in an accident a few months ago. They did not survive. I am the executor of their estate." A wave of emotions so complex and contradictory crashed over me that I couldn't speak. Grief for parents I had never met. Shock at the sudden revelation of their existence, and their loss. A dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped out from under me, and this time, there was nothing below. I don't understand," I stammered. "I know it's a great deal to take in over the phone," Mr. Albright said, his voice full of a compassion that felt more genuine than any I had received in my life. "That is why I am calling. Would it be possible for you to come to my office? I have some things to explain, and some documents to show you. I believe it would be in your best interest to do so as soon as possible." My mind was reeling. My biological parents. They had been looking for me. They had names: Eleanor and James. All the blank spaces in my history suddenly had the potential to be filled. The rootless feeling that had plagued me my whole life was now confronted with the possibility of an anchor. "Yes," I heard myself say, the word coming out as a breath. "Yes, of course." When? The offices of Albright, Finch, and Associates were the antithesis of Mr. Davison's dreary, antiquated space. Located on the top floor of a sleek glass skyscraper, the reception area was bright and modern, with minimalist furniture and sweeping views of the city. It felt like stepping into a different world, a world of quiet, confident success. I gave my name to the receptionist, and almost immediately, Mr. Albright emerged from a set of double doors. He was older than he sounded on the phone, perhaps in his late 60s, with a warm smile and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He was tall and distinguished, and he shook my hand with a gentle firmness. "Ms. Chloe," he said, "thank you for coming on such short notice. Please, come in." He led me back to a spacious corner office. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a breathtaking panorama of the city skyline. The other walls were lined with books, but unlike the dusty legal tomes in Richard's lawyer's office, these were mixed with volumes on art, science, and literature. This was the office of a man with a curious mind. "Please, sit," he offered, gesturing to a comfortable leather chair. He sat behind a large, uncluttered desk. "Can I get you some water? Tea?" "I'm fine, thank you," I murmured, though my throat was completely dry. Albright leaned forward, his expression compassionate. "I know this is a profound shock, Chloe. I want you to feel free to ask any questions you may have, and to take all the time you need." I simply nodded, unable to form a coherent thought. He began to speak, his voice calm and steady, and he laid out a story that felt like a plot from a novel. My biological parents, Eleanor and James Hamilton, had been high school sweethearts who had me when they were very young. Their families had disapproved, and under immense pressure, they had been forced to give me up for a closed adoption. It was, Mr. Albright said, the single greatest regret of their lives. "They never stopped looking for you," he explained. "As soon as they were able, they began searching. But a closed adoption, especially back then, creates a lot of sealed records. They hired private investigators, spent years following leads. It was the central mission of their adult lives." He slid a framed photograph across the desk. I picked it up with a trembling hand. It was a picture of a smiling couple standing on a beach, their arms around each other, the wind tossing their hair. The woman, Eleanor, was beautiful, with kind eyes and the same slight curve to her smile that I saw in my own reflection. The man, James, had a strong, gentle face. They looked happy, successful, and deeply in love. They looked like people I would have wanted to know. A wave of grief, sharp and painful, washed over me for the life we could have had. "Who were they?" I whispered, my thumb tracing the outline of my mother's face. "They were brilliant," Mr. Albright said with a sad smile. "James was a software architect, and Eleanor was a biotech engineer. Together, they founded a tech company in their early 20s. You may have heard of it, Innovate Dynamics." My eyes widened. Innovate Dynamics wasn't just a company, it was one of the biggest names in medical technology. Their diagnostic software was used in hospitals all over the world. They were pioneers, visionaries. And they were my parents. For years, they poured all their energy into their work and into the search for you, he continued. They became incredibly successful, but they always said it was meaningless without you to share it with. They lived relatively simple lives, always hoping that one day they could give you everything. He paused, his expression turning solemn. They had finally gotten a breakthrough. A judge had granted them a petition to unseal the original birth records. The hearing was scheduled for 3 months ago. They were on their way to a final preparatory meeting with their legal team when the accident happened. Tears pricked my eyes as I looked at the smiling faces in the photograph. They had been so close. So close to finding me, and me to finding them. After their passing, Mr. Albright went on, it fell to me, as their executor, to follow through. The court granted the petition posthumously. And the records led us to you. He slid a thick portfolio across the desk. This is their last will and testament. They updated it every year, always with the same clause. He opened the portfolio to a specific page and turned it to face me. My eyes scanned the legal text until they landed on my own name. But it wasn't the name I knew. It was Chloe Hamilton. Mr. Albright read the crucial passage aloud. Should we pass away before we are reunited with our beloved daughter, Chloe, we hereby bequeath our entire estate, including all shares in Innovate Dynamics, all properties, and all financial assets, to her, our sole and only heir. It is our deepest wish that this inheritance provides her with the security, freedom, and happiness that we always dreamed of giving her in person. He then slid one final document toward me. It was a summary of the estate's value. I stared at the number at the bottom of the page, but my brain couldn't process it. The string of zeros was so long it looked like a typo. It wasn't just millions. It was a fortune so vast it seemed unreal. They wanted you to know, Mr. Albright said softly, that you were never abandoned. You were lost. And they spent their entire lives trying to find their way back to you. I finally broke down. I put my head in my hands and sobbed. I wept for the parents I never knew and for the love I had just discovered. I wept for the validation, the earth-shattering proof that I was wanted, that I was cherished, that I had a history, a legacy, a place in the world. It was a legacy not of construction and stone, but of innovation, brilliance, and a love so powerful it had reached across decades to find me. In that moment, the pain inflicted by the Sterlings didn't disappear, but it shrank. Their cruel little world, which had once been my entire universe, was suddenly just a tiny, insignificant speck in the vast, new reality that was opening up before me. It took a few weeks to even begin to process the seismic shift in my life. Mr. Albright guided me through the initial steps with paternal patience. There were papers to sign, accounts to verify, and a mountain of information to absorb. The numbers were abstract, the concepts of trusts and portfolios bewildering. But one thing was crystal clear, my life of quiet scrimping, of worrying about rent and student loans, was over. More importantly, the empty space inside me, the one carved out by the Sterlings, was being filled with the story of James and Eleanor Hamilton. I learned about their philanthropic work, the scholarships they funded, the medical charities they supported. They were good people who had used their brilliant minds and immense wealth to make the world a better place. The inheritance wasn't just a windfall. It was a responsibility, a legacy of kindness I was determined to honor. News of the Hamiltons' estate passing to a long-lost heir made a few ripples in the financial press. The stories were discreet, mentioning only a sole beneficiary and never my name, a protection Mr. Albright had fought hard to secure. I had no illusions, however, that the news would stay private for long in the circles the Sterlings traveled in. The world of business and finance in our city was smaller than one might think. I was in my apartment one evening, sorting through a box of documents Mr. Albright had given me, letters and journals my parents had kept, when there was a loud, insistent knock on my door. My heart jumped. I rarely had unannounced visitors. I peered through the peephole, and my blood ran cold. It was Helen and Ethan. They stood in the dim hallway of my building, looking completely out of place in their expensive coats. Helen was wringing her hands, a look of strained anxiety on her face. Ethan was rocking back and forth on his heels, radiating an impatient, nervous energy. My first instinct was to pretend I wasn't home. To turn off the lights and wait for them to leave. What could they possibly want? But then, a new feeling surged through me, one I hadn't felt before, not fear, not hurt, but a cold, steely curiosity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one at a disadvantage. I opened the door, their faces registered surprise, as if they hadn't actually expected me to answer. "Chloe!" Helen exclaimed, her voice a few octaves too high, coated in a thick layer of feigned warmth. She lunged forward for a hug, but I took a small step back, and she was left embracing empty air. She recovered quickly, clasping her hands together. "Oh, honey, we were so worried. You just disappeared. We've been trying to call." It was a blatant lie. I had checked my call log. There were no missed calls from either of them. Ethan, for his part, managed a tight, uncomfortable smile. "Hey, Chloe," he mumbled, his eyes darting around my small living room, taking in the modest furniture with a barely concealed sneer. "Long time no see. What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. "I didn't invite them in." "Can we come in, dear?" Helen asked, trying to peer around me. "It's not right to talk in the hallway. We have things we need to discuss. As a family." The word family was so audacious, so utterly shameless, that I almost laughed. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. They scurried in. And the space immediately felt smaller, contaminated. Helen began to pace, her hands fluttering nervously. "Chloe, first of all, we want to apologize. Deeply. What happened at the lawyer's office was a travesty." Ethan nodded eagerly. "A total travesty," he echoed. "Dad, you know how he was. Old-fashioned. He was from a different generation. He didn't mean for it to be so harsh. He just wanted to protect the family business," Helen added quickly. His mind wasn't clear at the end. "He loved you, Chloe. We all do. You'll always be my daughter." The lies were so thick I could have choked on them. They were clumsy, desperate, and insulting. They thought I was the same naive girl who would accept any crumb of affection they chose to throw her way. They had no idea who they were talking to anymore. I remained silent, watching them. My silence seemed to unnerve them more than any argument would have. Finally, Ethan couldn't take the pretense anymore. He blurted it out. "Look, Chloe, we heard you came into some money." "A ridiculous rumor, I'm sure," Helen interjected, shooting Ethan a furious look. "But if, on the off chance, your circumstances have improved, well, there's something we need your help with." She finally stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes pleading. "It's the business, Chloe. Sterling and Son. Your father made some bad investments before he passed. We're in trouble. Deep trouble. The banks are calling in our loans. We're on the verge of losing everything." So there it was. The real reason for their visit. Not concern, not remorse. Greed. Their world was collapsing, and they had come to the person they had just disowned to save them. The sheer, unadulterated nerve of it was breathtaking. "We need a loan, Chloe," Ethan said, his voice dropping. "A significant one. To save the Sterling legacy. To save Dad's memory. It's what he would have wanted." They stood there, my former mother and brother, looking at me with pathetic, hungry eyes. They saw me not as a person they had wronged, but as a walking, talking ATM. They hadn't come to beg for my forgiveness. They had come to beg for my mercy. And for the first time, I realized I held all the power. I let the silence stretch out, watching the hope and desperation mingle on their faces. I saw them for what they truly were, not towering figures of authority, but small, frightened people. Terrified of losing their status, their comfort. The fear I had lived with my entire life, the fear of their disapproval, had vanished completely. Finally, I spoke, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a lifetime of unspoken truths. "You are right about one thing, Ethan. Your father was from a different generation. A generation that believed blood was more important than love. He made his beliefs perfectly clear. I looked at Helen, whose face had gone pale. And you, Mom, I said, the word feeling foreign and bitter on my tongue. You stood by and let him do it. You sat in that office and inspected your sleeve while my world fell apart. You never loved me. You just tolerated me. That's not true. Helen cried, tears of self-pity welling in her eyes. I do love you. We are your family. My family? I asked, a genuine, mirthless laugh escaping my lips. My family is a man and a woman named James and Eleanor Hamilton. A family who spent 28 years searching for me. A family who wanted me so desperately that they wrote me into their will every single year, hoping to find me. They left me their legacy, a legacy of kindness and innovation, not one of concrete and prejudice. I turned my gaze to Ethan, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. And you, I said, my voice hardening. You come here, to my home, and you talk about saving Dad's memory? The last memory I have of you and him is you laughing while I was being legally disowned. You stood there, smug and victorious, after the will confirmed what you'd been telling me my whole life. I took a step closer, and he flinched. I leaned in, just as he had done in the lawyer's office, and lowered my voice to a near whisper. What was it you said, Ethan? You're not one of us anyway. You were right. I'm not. And I have never been more grateful for that fact than I am at this very moment. I walked over to my front door and opened it wide. The answer to your request is no. The Sterling legacy is your burden, not mine. You built your world on the idea of bloodline, so you can save it with your own blood, sweat, and tears. Mine are no longer available to you. They stared at me. Mouths agape, shock and fury replacing their pathetic pleas. The script had been flipped, and they had no idea how to react. You can't do this. Ethan sputtered, his arrogance returning now that his groveling had failed. After everything we did for you. Everything you did for me? I replied, my voice dangerously calm. You gave me a roof and then reminded me daily that I didn't own it. You gave me a name and then took it away. You've done enough. Now, please leave. Helen started to sob, a theatrical, wailing cry. Chloe, please. You're tearing this family apart. No, Helen, I said, looking her straight in the eye. You are mistaken. You can't tear apart something that was never whole to begin with. You, Richard, and Ethan were the family. I was just the guest. And my stay is over. Ethan grabbed Helen's arm, pulling her toward the door. His face was a mask of cold fury. Fine, he hissed. Keep your money. We don't need you. He dragged a still sobbing Helen out into the hallway. Before he left, he turned back one last time, his eyes filled with a hatred that was almost pitiable. You'll regret this, he snarled. I just smiled, a real, genuine smile of relief and freedom. No, Ethan, I said softly. I don't think I will. And with that, I closed the door on them, the solid click echoing the one I had heard a few weeks ago at the lawyer's office. But this time, it wasn't a sound of exclusion. It was the sound of liberation. It was the sound of me, Chloe Hamilton, finally, truly, coming home, standing alone in my quiet apartment. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The ghosts of the past had been faced and vanquished. My future was a blank page, no longer an addendum to someone else's story, but the first chapter of my own. I had a history to learn, a legacy to honor, and a world of good to do. For the first time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward to. So, I have to ask you, the audience, what would you have done when the very people who threw you away come crawling back, not for forgiveness, but for a handout? What is the right response? Is it mercy? Is it justice? They showed me none, yet they demanded it from me. I made my choice, and I sleep soundly at night. But I wonder, if you were in my shoes, would you have closed the door, or Or would you have written the check? After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments. Create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.